This is Michael Popok, and by the looks at how dark it is, it must be Legal AF After Dark. This week, we talked about on the show Mar-a-Lago. Talk about an upside-down flag world. This was an upside-down world where the prosecutors, who are trying to bring to the attention of a federal judge that the criminal defendant who happens to be named Trump is going around accusing people in public and accusing the FBI in public of being involved with a conspiracy with President Biden to assassinate Donald Trump, the Secret Service, and his family, you'd think there's something probably wrong with that. Maybe it violates a condition of Donald Trump's release. And that's something that the prosecution should bring to the attention of the judge. Not this judge. This judge doesn't like the way that the prosecution brought it to her attention. And instead of ruling the way we thought she would, or the way that she should have, instead did something else, and we tell you all about it on Legal AF. Take a listen. Let's move on to Mar-a-Lago. You want to kick it off? What is going on? I can't even get it out. Why don't you frame it first? What happened? What did Jack Smith appropriately do and his team, and what did Trump do? And then we can pick up with what the judge decided to do.
So Jack Smith and his team were responding to a series of accusations made by Trump and all of his henchmen. Things like when they raided Mar-a-Lago, the FBI was going to assassinate me. They put a hit out on me. They were going to use deadly physical force. They planned on killing me. I mean, just horrendous claims. And Jack Smith's team, the Special Counsel's office, they filed an order to modify Trump's conditions of release, because don't forget, he's out on bail, or I should say he's out on release conditions on all four of his cases, because he was arrested and he had to be released, and he was released with conditions. And now they want to put a condition to modify his release status, saying that he can't make statements that pose a, quote, significant, imminent, and foreseeable danger to law enforcement agents participating in the investigation and prosecution of the case. It's almost like an emergency motion, or an motion to basically just say, you can't do that, right? You can't, that by making these kinds of comments, you basically put a target on the back of law enforcement. And so when this happened, I was focused completely on the Manhattan DA case that's on trial right now. So I didn't actually read it until in preparation for this episode. I also then saw that in a paperless order, Judge Cannon denied this, saying Jack Smith didn't meet and confer. He didn't do what he was supposed to do. It was a technicality. That's a local rule in Florida, that before you make a motion, it might even just be a local rule in her court, I'm not really sure, but there's a requirement that you do a meet and confer, which just means you meaningfully get together and you discuss it and see if you can resolve it. And if you can't, you say whether, when you make a motion, it was either on consent or after a meaningful meet and conferral, we could not come to a consensus, and so this is opposed. So this motion. So from the coverage, I just assumed there was no meet and confer. When I was preparing for this podcast, I was shocked when I read in the motion that the one that we just talked about, this emergency motion, saying that there's imminent foreseeable danger to law enforcement based on these outrageous statements made by Trump and his supporters. Okay, there's a footnote number 1. And footnote number 1 reads as follows. The government contacted counsel for defendant Trump, who stated that they object to the motion and the timing of the conferral on this holiday weekend. It is their position that the government has not provided an opportunity for meaningful conferral. They do not believe there's any imminent danger and asked to meet and confer next Monday. However, within just the last few hours, Trump has continued to issue false statements, smearing and endangering the agents who executed the search. And then they posted the Truth Social the Truth Social statement that he claimed the FBI was authorized to use lethal force on Trump or anyone at Mar-a-Lago, while the FBI and DOJ plants evidence to frame Trump. I was shocked, okay? I'm sorry, the government did exactly what they were supposed to do. They called him, they notified them. I was surprised they even did that. This is an emergency motion to protect law enforcement. And they called him and they're like, no, I'm sorry. It's a holiday. I want to go to a barbecue and it's Memorial Day weekend.
They didn't frame it as an emergency. Why not? Why didn't Jack Smith make it an emergency motion?
You mean in the title of it?
Yeah, he didn't file it as an emergency motion. See, my point, Karen, I did recently, is that there's two things I would have done. If you got to follow her rules, and she's already let the prosecution know a number of times that they've been violating her rules when it comes to she's big. Talk about hobgoblins of little minds. She's big on this meet and confer thing, and she has chastised them and wrapped their knuckles, the prosecution, a couple of times under this 88.1 local rule about meet and confers. It's her thing, So when you got a judge, if that's your thing, then you got to follow it. The problem is, what I would have done is I would have filed it as an emergency motion for exactly the reasons that you just laid out so eloquently, and I would have moved for an expedited briefing schedule, a motion to shorten time on the briefing schedule, so it didn't play out over the normal briefs. It went in a shorter period to also whenever I do an emergency motion, I almost always ask for shortened time for briefing because that shows that it's an emergency. Otherwise,
I'll tell you the reason they wouldn't have done it. Right. Because this is for bail conditions. I mean, this is release conditions. This isn't just a motion for the court. He's posing an imminent danger based on his release. You don't do that with briefing schedules. These bail condition motions are typically done in this way, right? You come before the court and you make your argument, and then you have them modify the bail conditions. I mean, I don't know. I don't know why they didn't do it that way. And maybe you're right, but I assume that they probably thought that would have taken longer. But I was just appalled by her reaction. She said, the way she reacted to this. But I just want to read a little bit more about what Jack Smith was asking for. He said, the court should modify Trump's conditions of release to reasonably assure the safety of any other person or the community, and to implement the court's independent obligation to protect the judicial proceeding. Professional law enforcement officers and agents in this country put their lives on the line every day in carrying out their duties to enforce the law. When executing court-authorized warrants, those professionals face many uncertainties and potentially grave risks. To minimize the threat to harm to law enforcement professionals and civilians, agents plan carefully for all contingencies, and they also follow standard policies and protocols, including the prohibition on using deadly physical force except when necessary. The FBI followed these entirely standard and appropriate practices here. Trump, however, surprisingly, this is my editorializing, shocked, has grossly distorted these standard practices by mischaracterizing them as a plan to kill him, his family, and U.S. Secret Service agencies. Those deceptive and inflammatory assertions irresponsibly put a target on the backs of FBI agents involved in this case, as Trump well knows. Indeed, Trump himself recognizes the power of his words and their effect on his audience, agreeing that his supporters, quote, listen to him like no one else. He quoted, that's a quote of a transcript from CNN's town hall that Caitlin Collins did with Trump May 11, 2023. And his documented pattern of speech and its demonstrated real-time, real-world consequences have often. Now, I just want to point out two things. Number one, how Trump is treated differently than everybody else. If anybody else in any other case endangered the lives of law enforcement and grossly distorted facts and lied like this, any judge would not hesitate. They'd put him right in. I mean, look at what happened to Sam Bankman-Fried, okay? There he was going to release something that had to do with his ex-girlfriend, letters. She was a witness in the case against him. There was no briefing schedule. There was no meet and confer. There was a haul his ass into court and he was put in. That is what happens. That is how judges behave. When the fact that he could go out there and distort the facts and say, when they put in there, do not use deadly physical force except in these circumstances. And, what upset me about this search, what pissed me off about this search, is how the FBI treated Donald Trump and his family differently than they treat every other person, especially people of color in this country. Look at and again, I say this because it's my husband who represents him. It's Puff Daddy, the Sean Combs case and the execution of that search warrant. Look at how that search warrant against a Black family, his children were put in handcuffs. They came in with tanks down the street, and they had guns blazing to execute that search warrant. Look at how they did this one. They made sure that they weren't wearing uniforms. They were wearing collared shirts, and they made sure that the Trump and his family weren't home that day. They coordinated with the Secret Service ahead of time, and they called the lawyers for Donald Trump to make sure if there's any issue, we will coordinate together. This was the softest execution of a search warrant that I have ever seen. I mean, the way you ask any person of color in this country who has had a search warrant executed against them, they are handcuffed. They're put up against the wall. Anyone who's there, anyone and everybody indiscriminately treated a certain way. The way they bent over backwards for Donald Trump in the execution of that search warrant is so outrageous. So for him to then turn around and make this claim against them is just ridiculous. And so I just hope that the law enforcement and the people who are bending over backwards for this man to treat him a certain way should realize he's not your friend. I don't know why they do it. I don't know why everyone treats him this way and bends over backwards for this man. But, they do it. And yet he stabs them in the front anyway. And so, maybe it's time to start treating him like everybody else. But the fact that the government tried to meet and confer, and she said it wasn't enough. This is real. These are real targets on the backs of these agents who put their lives on the line every single day, and we should revere them, we should respect them, and we should not treat them this way. And I'm just completely outraged by the story. I know you just asked me to frame it and I went off, but I apologize. This one really pissed me off.
It's all right. Well, you're a former prosecutor, and how agents should be treated. And the issue is that there is in every search warrant, this one was authorized through a federal magistrate, Judge Reinhardt, up in Fort Lauderdale, based on sworn testimony that was provided to him, which indicated that it was more likely than not that a crime was being committed at Mar-a-Lago related to the retention of top secret documents and information belonging to you and me. And hearing that Donald Trump was moving the documents around and trying to delete security footage, they got their search warrant. And in the search warrant, as boilerplate in every Department of Justice search warrant that I'm aware of, it has a limitation on the use of deadly force. It's a limitation on the use of deadly force, not an instruction to use deadly force. And it says only, and first of all FBI agents or their derelict in their duties have to carry firearm. They don't get to take it off and leave it in the van because it's Donald Trump. They're law enforcement. They need to have their firearm. There's so many instances, and we can start with in the last 40 years, Waco and Texas and different places where law enforcement's lives are at risk when they're executing what seems to be perfunctory search warrants, but turn out not to be because they've been ambushed. That's one. Two, it outlines for them the limited time when they're allowed to use force, when their life is in imminent danger and things like that. Donald Trump knows, that's why it's a lie to his public, to his grifting donors, that it was August in Mar-a-Lago. He's never in Mar-a-Lago in August. He's always in Bedminster into camps there by March or April because it's hot as balls. I've lived in Florida and in that area in particular in August.
You're hilarious.
It's hot as balls in Florida in August. I lived in West Palm, right across the bridge from Mar-a-Lago. I know of what I speak. Now, and all the coordination that you talked about, Secret Service, staff at Mar-a-Lago, family members, and the rest. He was in order to be the target of an assassination plot by the President of the United States, which is what Donald Trump's claim is in his emailing to get money. He'd have to at least be, I think we'd all agree, he'd have to at least be in the same physical location as the FBI executing. Not only that, the lawyers for Donald Trump were present, right? We had Christina Bobb, she now indicted and having been arraigned in Arizona for her role in many things Trump was involved. Evan Corcoran, who participated in a crime or fraud, according to at least one judge up in the District of Columbia. and had to turn over all of his notes and all of his recordings. He and Jennifer Little were all involved. Some of them were watching it on video recordings. I didn't even know they had video cameras until I read that they wanted to watch the execution of the search warrant on video. So to your point, people of color, even rich people of color like Puff Daddy, don't get this courtesy. And they certainly are. They can't claim that they were the subject of an attempted assassination. And you're right. I think you're right. I don't think you have to label it emergency when you're talking about conditions of release. Because every criminal defendant, state or federal, for those that watch us around the world or aren't as attuned to this as we are, every criminal defendant, once it is released from, it has bond conditions at the mercy of the court system and the presiding judge. They are free because a judge has allowed them to remain free until their trial, unless they're so violent or have violated other things that constitute a flight risk that they need to be put away, like many of the Jan 6 defendants. But you are not, and this is what Judge Chutkan does regularly and Judge Merchan does appropriately regularly, which is to put Donald Trump in his seat and remind him that he is a criminal defendant in a criminal case, and his liberty is at their discretion. Cannon flips, talk about shifting the burden, turns it on its head and I understand the prosecution has the ultimate burden, but this is a criminal defendant in a criminal process I defy Aileen Cannon, if I'm ever on a panel with her down in South Florida, to tell me one other defendant that she's ever presided over, criminal defendant, that was allowed to claim that the prosecution and the Department of Justice and the FBI was going to assassinate him in his home, and tell that to the public and amplify it on a megaphone to millions and millions of people, and that wouldn't be a violation of the conditions of release that you read aloud. And she wouldn't be able to answer that question because it's a lie. It's a lie. So what we have is what some people are like, I don't want to leave them in despair. What happens next? There were two motions that were denied without prejudice. One was Donald Trump's, because he actually filed a motion for sanctions against Jack Smith, arguing that they violated the meet and confer. They didn't confer with us nicely. And now the judge says, yeah, I don't like the way that conferral went. So from now on, there has to be a conferral with reasonable time. And then you have to put a paragraph of 200 words or less of exactly what the other side wants you to put into their statement so that I can see exactly how the conferral went. And I'm like, are we talk about losing the forest for the trees? What about the guy over there who's violating his terms of his release and attacking the FBI and claiming they're trying to kill him? No. You didn't do the stamp was upside down on the envelope and the size of the table was wrong. And no, I can't do this. I mean, that's where she's at right now. So now she's told the prosecutors, if you do it again, I'm going to sanction you. Which even Trump didn't ask for. And then Trump had his own motion for sanctions, which she denied without prejudice because they didn't confer with the government. But that was at the tail end. You too. You didn't do it right either. Neither did you. Nyeh. And so we got a paperless order that you can't appeal. And now it's without prejudice, meaning both sides can file after they have meaningful conferral. So I assume at some point, now that the jury's deliberating, or at some point, they're going to have meaningful conferral sometime this week, and the two of them are going to file their motions again. And the judge is going to have to get to the substance of this. But you know her, she'll drag her feet out. It'll suddenly be August. Speaking of August, by the time she sets a hearing or rules on the thing, and then she'll rule against the prosecution. She'll say, no, First Amendment core political speech, he can say what he wants, even if it's a lie, which is not really the constitutional precedent. But she'll say that. And then he can take her to the 11th Circuit. By that time, it'll be August or September. And we got a trial in November. Welcome back. There's lawyers on a show talking about things that they know what they're talking about at the intersection of law and politics. How refreshing. We call it Legal AF, the podcast, and for a reason. You want to know why? Join Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time right here on this MeidasTouch YouTube channel and then on major podcast platforms of your choice. We curate the top 4 or 5 stories at the intersection of law and politics. We bring it to you as practicing attorneys only one way, right here on the MeidasTouch Network and on Legal AF. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting. Heary, heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.